Zoe was born a sweet little girl with dimples on her cheeks and blonde hair, like an angel and not a child. Unfortunately, the baby had an incomplete family, so after the birth her mother brought her to an empty rented apartment and began to raise her on her own. Her grandmother visited them at first, but she died a year after the birth of her granddaughter. Olivia had to put the child into daycare and get a job to live somehow and pay the rent. The woman worked in a factory as a molder, the salary was good, and they gave out lunches, so it was possible to survive. Zoe remembered that her mother never got discouraged. She always had a positive attitude and tried to pass it on to her child. She used to tell her daughter, never hang up. Bad today and good tomorrow. Life can't always be bad, otherwise it will be boring. The girl learned from her mother to be optimistic, for which she was very grateful. However, when the little girl was 6 years old and she went to first grade, the unbelievable happened. The girl was called to the principal's office after school and sat in a chair. The principal began explaining to her in a trembling voice that her mother was very ill, so she would not be able to take her, and Olivia would have to live in an institution called an orphanage for the time being. To the question, "When will my mom pick me up?" the headmaster could not hold back tears. Later, when the girl grew up, she was told that there had been an accident at the plant, the ceiling collapsed, and her mother died under the debris. Since Zoe had no relatives and did not know her father, she was placed in an orphanage. Of course, life at the orphanage wasn't easy, but Zoe even liked it there sometimes. She loved going to classes, attending the drawing group and physical education. The girl with all her soul loved biology and chemistry and sometimes asked the teachers such clever questions that they just opened their mouths in amazement. All the teachers in a loud voice advised Zoe to prepare for medical school, and the girl decided that she really wanted to be a doctor. After graduation she applied to all medical institutions of the city and neighboring towns, but she only got into the local medical school. The state gave the orphan a tiny apartment, but even for that Zoe said thank you. It was much better in her own place than in a dormitory, and she made a profit in a common room for 10 people. At the college the girl received a scholarship. It was enough to pay the utilities, but she had to moonlight to eat. Zoe handed out flyers, sold vegetables at the market on weekends, and cleaned floors in the cafe. After graduating from medical school, the girl became a registered nurse. But she didn't get a good job. The girl got a job at the city surgery, but she did not work there for long. 2 months after she started working, the department lost all the medicine she was supposed to pay for. They started to sort things out and looked for the culprits, examined the data and questionnaires of each employee. When they saw that Zoe was a former pupil of the orphanage, they suspected her. Here's the motive. They were all thieves. No one caught her by the hand, but someone decided to set her up. One day Zoe went into the locker room and their colleagues huddled near her purse and held the ampule, allegedly out of her bag had fallen out. It was clear as day that the culprit planted it to cover his tracks, but no one wanted to look into it. The head doctor immediately called the police and they took Zoe to the police station. They gave her a criminal record of times 3 years. The girl served a year and a half for nothing, then was released early because she behaved well in prison. But Zoe had to give up her medical career. What medical university could she talk about if no one even wanted to take her as a nurse? After leaving the penal colony, the girl went to look for a job but got rejection after rejection. Of course, she did not go to the city hospital from which she had been kicked out. She went to a private one. And there, who would hire her with such a track record as a nurse? All she ended up doing was being a janitor. And she had to keep her nose out of it. She was assigned to the dirtiest place, the foyer and the stairs. Aunt Grace, a neighbor, found this job for Zoe. She quit the job herself, she was too old and in poor health. Zoe just returned and the old lady looked after the apartment while she was away. So the grandmother started talking about the clinic. "Zoe, what do you care, the main thing is that they pay on time. After all, it is a private clinic. It has advanced technology and a good reputation. And then, you'll go higher." Zoe got a job, she worked, basically, everything was fine. She found a homeless kitten and took her in. She lived quietly, took care of the animal, it was more fun together. I got a steady paycheck, not a mountain of gold, of course, but still. It is better than a cleaner at a bus station, for example, to work. Zoe had been working at the clinic for 3 months, she had no conflicts with anyone, and her attitude was normal. And then a new surgeon appeared in the department. He was a tall, handsome, but young and sassy womanizer. He was dressed according to the latest trends and looked down on everyone. Nurses in general did not think of people, it was almost his concubines were, and nurses much less liked. However, when he was in a good mood, he offered his nurses alcohol, diluted with glucose. No one refused, so as not to incur his wrath. One day a surgeon, George, suddenly held a grudge against Zoe. She was mopping the floor in the lobby and accidentally splashed his light colored pants. she apologized, but he immediately raised a shout. He showed his displeasure, insulted the girl, called her a scumbag and said that next time she would lick the floor with her tongue and wash her pants with her mouth. Zoe had never heard such a thing in her life. Without a second thought she slapped the boor with a savory slap. The girl had always been not timid, but anger played its part. Look at him, he calls a young girl trash. The young surgeon was outraged by Zoe's behavior to the core. He left rubbing his cheek, but held a grudge against the girl. Even the head doctor reprimanded him, you should moderate your ardor, colleague. Or you will scrub the floors between surgeries. In the end, the surgeon calmed down a bit, but his anger did not diminish. Zoe breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that another doctor had interceded for her. She thought, well, that's it now, at last, he will get off. But it was not. The surgeon did not get off and began to oppress her and, at every opportunity, humiliate her. The girl herself was no longer glad that she slapped him in the face, but tolerated and kept silent in order not to lose her job. The most insulting thing was that even in his workplace, that surgeon did not deserve it. He did not shine with his knowledge every time he had problems during surgeries and the patients went unhappy. He knew the basics, of course, to put stitches, to open a boil, but something serious, it's doubtful. Rumor had it that his father is a big shot in the ministry, so he sent his offspring to a warmer place. The more offensive it was to Zoe that some ignoramus pretended to be a king and asserted himself at her expense. One Friday night, when almost no one was in the department, there was an ordinary incident with an unexpected ending. Witnesses brought in a guy who had been injured in a car accident. He had a laceration of the thigh and major blood vessels had been hit. Spouses who saw the wound bleeding did not wait and clamped the wound with rags and took the boy to the first clinic they could find. Luckily it was on the way, very close. They did not wait for an ambulance, they knew they would not make it in time, they responded quickly, what to say. Everyone was in shock. In the emergency room, a young nurse fainted at the sight of the abundance of blood. She was not used to such horrors, her job was to go through the papers. There was no one to help the boy, the doctor on duty had disappeared and there were only patients around. And only Zoe, who was nearing the end of her shift, intervened and competently rendered assistance, thus saving the guy's life. She even put in temporary stitches to stop the bleeding. Of course, there was plenty to criticize her for the sloppy stitching and not acting according to instructions. But otherwise, everything turned out as it should have. The main thing is the patient's life, not aesthetics. And then, like a rabbit out of a magician's magic hat, there was a young surgeon, George, who was having fun in the residence room, so he did not even respond to the call. The man was drunk, and from the threshold he began to resent it, who the hell is this? Why are you helping a man from the street? We have an elite private clinic, record 6 months in advance, and you brought someone from the street, maybe he is contagious in general. Zoe only snorted when she heard what nonsense the surgeon said. The doctor almost sizzled her with his eyes, but the nurse bravely withstood his gaze. The surgeon took and placed the unconscious guy in the cheapest and most unsightly room so that he was not too relaxed in an elite institution. He scolded the janitor, of course, and promised to personally complain about leaving her without pay for herself. Dealing. The whole staff knew about what had happened and all looked reproachfully at the surgeon, as during the short time of work he had already fed up with everyone. The next day the father of the injured guy came to the clinic. It turned out that the victim of the accident was named David and he was the son of the city prosecutor Thomas. His father was dressed casually, without frills, very modestly. But the young surgeon did not know who was in front of him and said, "Come on, pay for the operation at the cashier's office or take your son away. Otherwise they will bring all sorts of bums here, only occupy rooms." The surgeon clearly smelled of alcohol after yesterday and he was not particularly polite, apparently not yet sobered up, and because of this, he was too bold. The prosecutor became furious and took out his identification. "Who are you? Why are you in the workplace intoxicated? Why was my son being assisted by a janitor? I'll blow up your whole place unless you give a clear explanation of what happened." The surgeon turned pale. At the shouting the head doctor came running, fawned over him, begged the prosecutor's forgiveness, grinded his teeth, and took him to his son's room. And the boy regained consciousness just recently and confirmed that it was the cleaning lady who had saved him. He was still conscious when witnesses were surprised that the nurse was so good at first aid. The prosecutor invited Zoe to her room and personally thanked her and shook her hand. He asked her if she needed anything and promised to help her with everything. He was ready to move mountains for her son's salvation. Zoe pulled herself together and told her about her problem, that she had been tried, but undeserved. The prosecutor was surprised to learn that she was a former convict. He promised to look into her case at his leisure. Thomas found out the circumstances of her criminal record and was very surprised at the inconsistencies in the testimony and errors in the proceedings. As a result, the case was reviewed and the criminal record was expunged. Zoe was overjoyed. The surgeon was politely asked to write a letter of resignation. Now he was notorious and no one would risk hiring him except as an orderly at the morgue where there was no competition. And the prosecutor's son James began to be friends with the janitor. After the incident, the chief physician invited Zoe to his office and told her that he was hiring her as a nurse in surgery, especially since the new surgeon needed assistance. The chief physician appreciated her knowledge and even promised a promotion over time. Zoe began to work in her specialty and at the same time was preparing to enter a medical university. She wanted to become a doctor to fulfill the dream of her childhood. Zoe began dating James. The young man was immensely grateful for his salvation, but after communicating with the girl, he realized that he could not find a kinder and more humane woman, and these were the qualities he was looking for in a girl. Soon he proposed to Zoe and at the same time asked her to move in with him. When the girl entered medical school, she was already engaged and lived with James' family. She was very happy as she had always dreamed of having a large family. Her mother in law treated her like a daughter and her father in law remembered the big deed her daughter in law had done when she was still a nurse, so everyone respected and loved the girl. The young people arranged a lavish beautiful wedding to which they invited all their colleagues from the clinic. Only Surgeon George was not invited. He was sitting in his luxurious apartment without work and was partying on his father's money as he could not even earn his own.